Dr. Nora Hansen tapped her pencil anxiously against the metal lab table, scrutinizing the complex mess of wires, circuits, and glowing screens comprising her latest experiment. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the electric anticipation fizzing through her veins. Today was the day. After nearly a decade, meticulously charting quantum probabilities and engineering increasingly precise time manipulation machinery, her new device would culminate 5 years of tireless work towards one lofty goal: constructing the world's first fully functional time loop machine. "You ready, Doc?" her research assistant Sanjay asked as he powered up the system. His eyes glimmered behind thick glasses. Nora snorted. "What? 10 years studying temporal physics theory, not enough prep time for you?" "Hey, messing with the space-time continuum seems like the kind of thing you'd want to cram for," he joked back. His bony fingers danced across the control panel, executing their well-rehearsed launch sequence protocols. Nora chuckled, despite her nerves. She was grateful for Sanjay's reliably good humor. It was a welcome break from the tension that perpetually furrowed the brows of other quantum tech specialists, fraught over meddling with forces far beyond their comprehension. But today, finally, after meticulously calculating for every imaginable variable, they would transcend theory and break scientific ground by experimentally traveling through time. A loud beep interrupted Nora's racing thoughts as the system finished its initiation sequence. She drew in a sharp breath.
"All systems ready for activation," Sanjay confirmed. "Ready to make history, boss."
"I was born ready," Nora replied with more confidence than she felt. Her thumb hesitated over the gleaming red execute button. Years of painstaking work had built towards this moment, but doubt still gnawed at the edges of her mind. Was she truly prepared for the monumental forces they were about to unleash? Her grasp of temporal physics was unparalleled, but with unconquered scientific frontiers came profound risks. If anything went awry with the delicate machinery, no. She forcibly steered her mind away from the vivid parade of worst-case scenarios. Fear was an effective obstacle, only if given too much power. Now was the time for courage in the face of the unknown, as all explorers chasing the impossible must have. She met Sanjay's gaze. Their shared enthusiasm shone behind their apprehension. "On my mark, then," Nora said. 3, 2, 1. Initiate launch sequence. Her thumb depressed the button. An ominous hum immediately reverberated from the imposing archway of swirling steel and alloy they had engineered as the machine's main structure. Nora anxiously tracked the rising frequency. Deep within the device's intricate core, particles accelerated nearly to light speed, guided along carefully plotted quantum trajectories by the distribution of electromagnetic fields from Sanjay's ingenious programming. At first, nothing seemed amiss as flickers of light danced across the chamber. Then a violent tremor jolted the entire lab, followed by blaring klaxons. Alarms blazed as all their displays momentarily sputtered in chaos. Nora's heart seized. But after a few seconds, the sound settled down to the sustained thrum of enormous energy straining but controlled within its technological bonds. Sanjay whooped. "It's working!" Nora could scarcely breathe, much less speak, as she stared wide-eyed at the swirling vortex of light now occupying the space within the massive archway. The expected subtle ripples in the electromagnetic field lines confirmed what the readings streamed across their monitors were reporting. They had successfully generated a contained pocket of disrupted space-time. Sanjay let out an awed laugh, clutching Nora's arm. "By Einstein's whiteboard, Nora, we actually created a tunnel through time." Nora shook her head slowly, a thrilled grin spreading across her face. "Looks like all those late nights tinkering paid off. We just took the human race's understanding of temporal physics and launched it decades further in one go." Her wonder quickly gave way to the ingrained focus of a scientist as she scrutinized the incoming data, ensuring the quantum field modulation remained stable. When she finished confirming all readings were still safely within expected parameters, she turned excitedly to Sanjay. "Let's proceed to Phase 2, and commence external environment testing, she declared. Initialize the observation drone transmission. They had exhaustively prepared for this next critical stage of examining how objects and information move through the generated time warp tunnel. Sanjay pivoted to activate their custom-programmed drone. As it hummed through an automated systems check, he glanced back at Nora. So, how far forward should we try viewing for its first jump? A week? A month, maybe? His eyes gleamed with possibility. Nora grinned. I was thinking more like 5 years. At Sanjay's startled look, she added, What, you wanted baby steps? I've never been one to shy away from embracing the temporal unknown. She punctuated her statement with a dramatic wiggle of her fingers. Have I ever mentioned you're completely insane? In the best kind of pioneering scientist way? Sanjay chuckled affectionately. Their joyful camaraderie gave Nora a boost of confidence about pushing the very boundaries of time themselves. After double-checking the guidance parameters, she transmitted the launch signal to the hovering drone. Bon voyage. Hopefully we'll regain contact in just a few moments. The slim drone floated silently into the shimmering tunnel aperture and disappeared. A deafening explosion rocked the lab, bursting from the temporal tunnel in a blinding corona. Nora shielded her eyes reflexively. What happened? She shouted over the din of crunching metal and shattering glass. Acrid smoke flooded the room as debris rained down around them. Sanjay coughed harshly, frantically sweeping aside rubble to access the now sparking control terminal. Some kind of power surge, he yelled back. Safety protocols are overloaded. We've lost containment. Horror curdled in Nora's gut as she took in the bright flames engulfing their precious prototype arch. This was the calamity every time travel theorist feared, a rupture in the quantum tunnel itself. She vaulted towards the manual emergency controls, desperate to prevent catastrophe, but halted when a powerful tremor nearly toppled her. Nora barely maintained her balance by clinging to a buckling support strut. She glanced back wildly at Sanjay. Temporal structure degrading rapidly. He pointed a shaking hand at a monitor cycling dire warning symbols. At this rate of collapse, the quantum field will backlash through the whole facility unless... His voice cut off with a choked gasp as the fabric of reality itself seemed to warp around them. Nora's senses swam nauseatingly. When the distortion momentarily rescinded, she glimpsed utter madness erupting outside the lab through a blown-out wall. Howling winds whipped debris into impossible velocities as the very air glowed with released temporal energy. Gaping fissures split concrete and steel like paper. Nora's mind reeled at the implications. The unleashed forces were consuming the research center. "Sanjay!" she screamed. "We have to shut it down!" But as she stumbled toward him, the building shuddered again. She heard the deafening crack of shattering supports microseconds before the ceiling caved in atop them. Then silence. Nora clawed back to consciousness, choking down mouthfuls of acrid smoke and debris. An ominous red glow filtered through the wreckage that buried half her body. "Sanjay," she rasped through the burning agony needling her limbs. No response. She desperately shoved aside fractured slabs and twisted steel to free herself, muscles screaming. When at last she staggered to her feet, the scope of the disaster paralyzed her. The lab was utterly demolished, structural remnants still ablaze with temporal energy discharge. But eclipsing the fire was the spasming hole ruptured through the fabric of the building itself. Through that impossible tear, Nora glimpsed the facility's central courtyard. Only where once green grass and trees thrived, now there spun a desolate vista. Scoured ground stretched under a sickly umber sky to the encroaching wall of a swirling sandstorm, massive and lightning-laced. But the tempest appeared frozen, mid-roil, cycling but never advancing. As Nora stared, her scientist's mind grappling for logical explanations, comprehension began dawning. That wasn't a sandstorm, but a temporal distortion generated by the quantum tunnel's breakdown. Which meant... Her gaze jerked down to her wrist interface. 29th of February, 2024. The same date displayed just before they activated the prototype. No, she rasped. No! This couldn't be real. But each desperate system diagnostic confirmed her nightmare. In the wake of the quantum field overload, some fail-safe had activated to seal the breached temporal stream into a circling loop. She was trapped, reliving the same day, again and again. Frantically, she dug through the rubble, finally uncovering a battered Sanjay. To her immense relief, he was breathing, but blood seeped from his temple. Nora shook his shoulder urgently. "Sanjay, can you hear me? We're caught in a chrono-hop cascade failure." Sanjay's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain and confusion. "Nora," he mumbled. Everything's blurry." "You have a bad concussion," Nora explained tersely. She helped him sit against a collapsed pillar. "There's no easy way to say this. When the quantum tunnel overloaded, it ruptured time itself. We're stranded in a repeating loop of this day." Sanjay blinked hard, struggling to process her words. He gingerly prodded the gash on his head, wincing. How is that possible?" Nora raked her fingers through her hair, mind racing. "It must be some sort of fail-safe I overlooked in the quantum field amplifier. To contain the temporal breakdown, it's cycling the local space-time curvature through recurring instances." She rose and paced, dread and guilt battling within her. "I should have predicted this possibility. Now, we're endlessly reliving a bubble of events isolated around the rupture point. And if the degradation continues—" A piercing groan of tortured metal interrupted her. Nora whirled to see the shimmering temporal fissure stretch wider as supporting materials warped and split. The cycling storm beyond yawned, promising oblivion. As she watched in horror, the opening visibly crept outwards, consuming more of their demolished surroundings. "It's breaking down the existing space-time structure to fuel itself," she realized aloud, accelerating with each loop iteration. "Wait, if it keeps growing at this rate?" Sanjay blanched. "You're saying eventually it could unravel all of reality?" Nora turned to him, features etched with anguish. "This distortion is my fault. The failure point of my life's grandest work." Her voice dropped to a choked whisper. "And now the cost of my recklessness may be all of existence." Nora paced frenetically, brow furrowed as she racked her brain. There had to be a way to halt the spiraling destruction before the cursed temporal loop consumed their entire branch of causality. "Think, Nora," she berated herself angrily. She had engineered the quantum technology threatening the universe. Surely she could also disable it somehow. Sanjay looked up from the data readout he had rigged from his battered wrist interface. "I can't find any way to directly manipulate the loop from inside without risking catastrophic paradox," he reported solemnly. "Any changes we make to events are just assimilated into the existing cycle." Nora cursed vehemently. Of course, the confined circular sequence of events formed an isolated bubble. Their only conceivable chance was somehow breaking through to the outside plane of standard temporal flow. But to puncture the shell of the loop would require piercing all 6 dimensions of... Abruptly, Nora halted, pulse racing. Dimensions. "Sanjay, have you checked curvature propagation across all geometric axes?" she demanded urgently. He frowned, hands dancing through hollow display analysis filters. When the requested data projection surfaced, his eyes widened behind cracked glasses. "You're right. There's a minute deviation in the structural integrity modulus, inconsistently distributed." Nora scarcely dared breathe, a fragile hope dawning. "Which means the loop isn't a perfect sphere," Sanjay concluded excitedly. "There's an irregularity we might be able to exploit to escape." They exchanged a fraught look, new determination stealing their stances. This anomaly offered one slim chance Nora refused to squander. She would find a way to pierce this accursed bubble, or die trying. The fate of untold futures depended upon it. "Get me an isolated topological projection of that weak point," she commanded Sanjay. There was no time for hesitation. Failure had always lingered as a possibility during her pioneering experiments, but she'd be damned if she let catastrophe claim the ultimate price. Nora's hands shook as she initialized the decoding sequence to access the quantum field amplifier's control code. After pinpointing the irregularity in the temporal loop schema, she and Sanjay had formulated a last-ditch plan. Forcibly initiate an asymmetric destabilization to break containment. She steadied her breathing, trying to ignore the expanding circumference of chaos devouring the facility ruins around them. If her emergency failsafe override succeeded, the system would self-terminate. But if they failed... "Ready when you are, boss," Sanjay confirmed, posture rigid as he monitored the wormhole interface readings. Nora steeled herself. "On my mark, then. 3, 2, 1... Initialize Cascade Confinement Purge." Her fingers flew across cracking touchpads, entering commands faster than her eyes could follow. For agonizing seconds, all displays flashed red rejection warnings. Then she entered one final authorization. With a deafening crack, the prototype arch ruptured, spewing raging torrents of energy. Reality warped sickeningly as space-time contorted. Then all sensation was swamped by an explosion of merciful blackness. 5 years later. Nora leaned heavily on her cane, limping across the memorial plaza where the research center once stood. The quantum accident that necessitated massive rebuild efforts was deemed her greatest failure. Yet today, dignitaries from every nation were gathering here to honor a nascent global peace accord born from that tragedy. Many credited shared grief over lives lost, uniting humanity against further scientific carelessness. But a tired smile pulled at Nora's lips. If only they knew that averted catastrophe was her proudest achievement, no matter the personal cost. Gazing up at gleaming new architecture, Nora breathed deeply, embracing bittersweet redemption. Her work was misunderstood, but its legacy would touch untold lives. After all, progress never came without sacrifice.